Welcome to our LB's Lover of Books author chat. If this is your first time at an author chat, or if you're just the first time you're watching a recording, make sure you click to subscribe on my channel, LB the Lover of Books. I have over 30 recorded author chats posted, so I'm betting you've read some of those books and will enjoy watching those after the fact. Leave me a comment, let me know what you think. But for now, we have someone live today. This is Tracey Lange, and I'm going to introduce our next author. She was born and raised in New York City. She graduated from the University of New Mexico with a degree in psychology before owning and operating a behavioral healthcare company with her husband for 15 years. While writing her debut novel, We Are the Brennans, she completed a Stanford University online novel writing program. She currently lives in Bend, Oregon with her husband, 2 sons, and beloved German Shepherd. What's his or her name?
Star.
Star, thank you. And I'm wondering if one or both of those 2 sons helped with all the gaming and YouTube material, but we're going to have to get into that in just a little bit. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, well, thank you so much for being here, everybody, and for having me on. This is great.
We're so happy to be here. This is your second book, your first book, as I mentioned before. If y'all haven't read this, a fantastic debut, We Are the Brennans. And this is the second one. So tell me, what was different from writing your first book? Now this is sophomore. What changed?
In some ways, it went a little faster. You definitely learn a lot with that first one. And I think I was quicker to realize when I was going down the wrong road and say, okay, wait, go back, rather than kind of keep going and then have to cut a bunch and rethink. So that the whole process did go, it was a little more efficient this time for sure. But in some ways it was very stressful because it was the sophomore book, and there's people talk about the sophomore book all the time, and I didn't know what to expect. But certainly after Brennans received such a warm reception, I immediately was like, well, how do I top that, or what do I do next, or all of that. So there's a little more pressure with the second one, but at the same time you get a little bit more confident with each book. So in some ways it went a little faster for me.
So give us an idea on time. Like, how long did it take you to write We Are the Brennans, and then how long did it take you to write the Connellys of County Down?
Brennans was, the best I can nail it down is a little over 2 years, maybe 2 years and 3 months, from when I first started it to kind of that final draft. And that did include a couple of significant sort of pauses where I stepped back and I needed to just get some distance from it, and I was waiting for notes maybe from people. And then Connelly's was a little over a year. And again, that's many drafts. Usually my first draft will take several months, and then you kind of go back in again and again, of course. But so it did move along quite a bit quicker. But also Connelly's was my COVID book when we were all home and couldn't go out, and in Oregon here, we had terrible fires that particular summer. So we couldn't even go outside for part of the time. So I was really working on this thing. It was an escape for me. And I spent a lot of time on it every day. So that also is probably why it went a little bit faster for me.
It always fascinates me. I hear authors say, multiple drafts. What does that look? What number is that? Like, estimated? Like, I have no idea what you mean by that.
Well, and it's so hard to pinpoint, but I guess I think of a draft whenever I, finish a draft, and then I think about it and I get notes, and I kind of decide, okay, here are the things I'm going to focus on this next revision. And I kind of come up with a short list of what I think of as my guiding lights that are going to take me through that next revision. And of course, when you fix some bigger things, they all have a ripple effect. And so to me, that's a draft. Now, between those drafts, I don't know how many rounds of editing go on where you'll go back, you've realized you've kind of gone off track, you got to go back and forth. So it's not a totally linear process, but I mean, both those books went through 5, 6 drafts, solid drafts, probably, meaning significant changes. And to be honest, it's not like I lost or added characters. It's not even that major plot points changed much. But usually for me, my revisions are about just digging deeper and deeper with the characters and kind of layering in more and more each time. So
Well, I think,
that's about the best guess I can give you
I
on
think
number
that
of drafts.
we're so drawn to your characters because it is that slow burn, deep dive, character driven book that you write, and I'm here for it. Like I absolutely love that type of novel.
Thank
So,
you.
what was your inspiration for this book? Because you have this Irish family with the Brennans, right? Messy family drama. This is somewhat, again, messy family drama, but it is
Yes.
different. So, what brought this one to your brain?
I sort of settled on. I know writers that have pages, lists of ideas that they hope they can have enough time to get to. That doesn't really happen for me. I seem to settle on it's something, a situation will come to me, and it'll just sort of strike my interest, and I'll begin to think about how it might be fun to explore. In this case, and I would think I'm always going to write about family drama. That's kind of my little mini obsession, and I love digging into those relationships and dynamics. But this particular book, I kind of landed on just that initial idea of what it would be like for someone to come back home after serving time in prison, and what it would be like to try to rebuild her life from scratch, and all the obstacles she'd be facing, but then also the effect it would have on her family. The fact that she spent time in prison, but then the fact that she's coming back into the fold and trying to re-enter the family. So that's really that first just situation, I think, is what I glommed onto. And then I really go into characters for a long time after that, and spend many, many months just getting to know the various characters. And but that's kind of where this one started for me.
Well, it was so, I don't know, bizarre for me because I read in conjunction this book with the many lives of Mama Love, the memoir. I don't know if you've heard of this or read it, but it's her story about being incarcerated, most of it.
Oh, wow.
And
Interesting. I'll
so
write
it's
that down.
yeah, she's actually a ghostwriter, and now her own, she's written her own novel, but fantastic. And I just was
Okay.
so intrigued. And so if you haven't read that book and you were interested in the beginning part of readers out there of Tara's incarceration, it's the real life spin of that, and a lot of it was very similar. So did you have to do research with that regard, or did you already kind of know some information?
It was a mixture. I definitely did some research. I read lots of accounts of particularly women, the challenges they face when they come out of prison. But I did work in the mental health field for a long time as well, with people from all walks of life. But we definitely worked with people, teenagers coming out of juvenile detention, or adults coming out of prison that were trying to rebuild their lives. So it was a bit of experience with working with those folks, and then definitely research as well, though, because you really wanted to, it opens that as that very morning she's leaving, and I had to dig into that process a little bit and read about what that would be like. And so yeah, some experience, some research.
Well, I was really holding my breath for that last scene. I mean, because we don't know Brian at that point. We have no idea what's about to happen. And I'm thinking it's going to be the worst, right? Like how bad,
Right.
how much torture are you going to put us through here? But I just thought, oh gosh, fight or flight, right? So it really did ramp up the nerves right at the beginning of the book. Um, so you're writing multiple characters, you have multiple perspectives.
Mhm.
Did you find one easier, harder to write? Did one take longer? Did one stick with you longer?
Um, in both books so far, probably the most difficult is what I think of as kind of the main protagonist, Tara, in this book. Um, they all the characters had their challenges and things I loved about each of them. But, she was undergoing a fairly, she went through a lot, obviously, and was undergoing a lot of transformation in her life. And so you just always want to feel like you're digging into that and getting across what she's going through. And so it feels like that main protagonist kind of carries a little bit more weight, I guess, than the other characters. So far, Tara, and in my first book, Sunday Brennan, were kind of the ones that probably took the most time and revision, I guess. I really enjoyed, as far as characters, I really enjoyed writing in this book. I loved Connor, her nephew. He was just fun, kind of a bright light. And then I really enjoyed writing you mentioned them, the gamers. And a lot of that is because I did get a lot of information from my boys, because that's not me. I don't game. I'm not watching YouTubers play Call of Duty or any of the, so it was a great excuse to sit them down and pick their brains. And I had some fun with that. So those guys were fun to write.
So what did they think? Have they been able to read the book or maybe portions of it?
They did. They read it. They have read it. And they're always very supportive. I think they thought it was fun. It's certainly not my typical audience is not teenage boys. So I appreciate that that they're willing to read them. And but yeah, they were funny. I kind of had to teach them a little bit about, because they wanted me to get it right. And so they got really specific about the language and how it would, and I would say, okay, you have to remember who's going to read this. Like, I don't need to get too nitty gritty. I just need to, get the ideas across. So there was some of that. But it was fun. It was great. And I think I think they enjoyed being part of it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I mentioned many perspectives. How did you decide who you were going to use that we could get inside their head? But especially I want to know about Brian, because I think for me, he was a must have, because if not, I don't know that I would have trusted him very far into this novel. Like, I think it would have been, is he trying to still,
Right.
figure out the case, but really we got to see his love for Tara.
Yeah. I kind of knew from the get-go that the siblings would all have a point of view, because so much of it is about what they've been through and their bond and all of that. But I landed on Brian pretty early, and for a few reasons. And one was certainly I wanted us to see in his head, not just because then I think we kind of learned to trust him, but and kind of get to know his motivation. But I also thought it would be a bit of maybe a breather, or just a different perspective, to get someone in there who was on the outside of the family, and kind of I think he brought out a little bit different side of Tara, and even her siblings at times. So he was very purposeful to me, and I thought he was kind of a bit of hope for her. Because obviously when she first comes home, she's facing so much challenge. And but yeah, I thought it would be really nice to get someone in there who wasn't in the family, a little bit on the outside looking in.
Another character on the outside is DaCosta, the parole officer, which I loved her, first of all. But I'm wondering because she was such an advocate for Tara, but also, a rule follower to a certain extent. But how common is that for parole officers? Like, is she an exception, do you think, or do you think she's the rule?
It's hard to say. I worked a little bit with probation and parole officers here and there, and I mean, for the most part, they have good hearts, and they're trying their best to help their people, for sure, in my experience. But they do have a lot of you're kind of at their mercy, and they do. Really good parole officers tend to hold the line. So I don't know. She seemed to me a good mix of at least parole officers that I'd met or read about, where her heart was in the right place, good intentions, but definitely a rule follower and not easy. You know, she wasn't going to take much from anybody. So I thought she'd be a great fit for Tara, but a challenge as well. For
Yeah,
sure.
I think she was a much needed balance for Tara, and it worked well. Have you had any feedback with regard to Tara dating, or a police officer that was involved in her case? And if so, what was it, and how do you react to that?
You know, the only thing I've had a few people question that whole dynamic. I know a couple people talked about the imbalance in a relationship like that, which I totally understand. I mean, I think that was pretty obvious. Him being a police officer and his role in arresting her and sending her to prison, really. And that idea, like, can you get over that? And just I know a lot of people use that word imbalance, and I get that. To me, the important thing to me was just in the end, Tara, that he doesn't kind of sweep in and save everything. That she saved herself, and so that's in my mind what made them, the possibility of them real, because he certainly cares about her. He has for a long time. He kind of saw something in there from the beginning, but at the end of the day, Tara, she saves herself, I think. So I understand why people had that concern and kind of question it, for sure. But I guess that's where I landed with it. That's why I was okay with that setup.
Well, and I think that's why I like DaCosta so much too, because she is that ethical balance that even brings that up from the beginning, like as a warning, stay away, don't get involved. And it kind of put it in perspective from the beginning. But then again, on the opposite side, thank goodness we have Brian's perspective, right? Because if we didn't, we would have, I mean, I know I would have not believed that imbalance could be balanced out by Tara's, own
Yeah.
personality. So
Yeah, you're right. DaCosta was necessary. She's actually one of the later characters to come in. But it was missing that person that was pointing that obvious thing out about Brian and her and the situation. And so I was thrilled to add DaCosta in, and she was another great one to write. Really fun. But yeah, I think she was really necessary for that reason.
well, and I want to go quickly to the end, to your acknowledgments, because you did mention a person. Let me see, her name, Deb, I think it was, that
Yes.
found a missing link, and that it was something that you needed to put in. What was that piece? Because I feel like this is the right time to ask.
Yeah, that's my editor, Deb Futter, who's amazing. With both books, she really was able to kind of put a finger on something and say, here's what is missing, or here's what I think you need to rethink. And in this book, she loved it, she bought it, and she was on board. But when we had that first conversation, she said, I just feel like there's something, it goes a little too easy early on, or it moves a little too quickly. And she was just sort of talking it out. And then I go away and beat my head against the wall for a while and think about, okay, what's missing here? And that is when I did come up with DaCosta. And I emailed Deb and said, what about this? Of course. I mean, she's going to have a parole officer, which is in itself a huge challenge and pretty kind of scary at times. And she said, yep, that'll do it. So yeah, she definitely helped me find DaCosta.
So I kind of think that it's just interesting, because in the fairy tale, they each have their own powers. And
Right.
that sort of is a compass for you, and DaCosta sort of is a compass for Tara to find her own center again, to find her own way. And so I think that's kind of a neat connection between all those characters. That's a cool story.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, she turned out to be very important. I mean, once I thought about it, I was like, how could I not have her? Like, what was I thinking, But yeah, it took a little nudge from Deb to figure that out.
Well, another main theme is loss in this book. There's a lot of loss, both for
Yeah.
Tara and the siblings, for Connor and for Brian. So do you think that loss is possibly what brought Tara and Brian together as as a couple or as a connection, because it just seems so relevant between the two.
In my mind, I think I think they recognize something early on without probably even being aware of it. Especially Brian. I mean, she was sort of on the defensive, of course, being arrested in those first interviews they had. But I think, there's sometimes you meet those people in life, and it doesn't take long to realize that maybe you've got some similar experience, or you just sort of recognize something in them that you respond to. So I do think that played a role in at least that initial, being drawn to each other. Yeah.
I loved the quote that said, when parents die so early, they take too much with them, their children's security, their strongest guiding light, and biggest cheering section. It was like being left to free fall through life with no safe place to land. And I thought that was so eye-opening for both of those characters, right? Because they're both looking for the place to land. And it was later in the novel when Tara really realizes how, I think right at the phone call that's about to, when she's about to call Brian, that's what she needed, was that safe place. And she makes the decision to land. Like you said, she saves herself. And I thought that was a nice, circle back for both of them.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's what I was going for. That's, she makes that decision at the end, knowing that she's facing a very uncertain future, but she's decided this is what I want in my life. And so I will go back and I will face the music and whatever that means. But, she's making that choice to land where she wants to be. Yeah.
And she gets to see loss almost like, Scrooge, and see her father's perspective of what her life could have been and what all his loss was, which I think also was very eye-opening. Curious, do you think that he gets a chance with the family again?
I personally, I think so, over time, slowly. That's my gut feeling, especially after, where all this sort of ends, that at some point, and it would probably be a while. But I like to think that maybe they bridge some sort of the gap to some degree. I don't picture happy holiday meals where everybody's sitting around, but I like to think that maybe they let him in to some degree, because so much of this book to me is about just how little in life is black and white, and how often people really are, they're misguided maybe, but they're trying to do the best, or the intentions are there. I mean, he had his reasons. None of them can be really justifies what he did, but later in life he is reaching out and he'd like to try to connect in some way. So yeah, I like to think that maybe there's a little bit of a connection forged there.
Well, I was glad that you did bring him back in the story, because we knew that he had tried to contact her and she had shut it down. And so when he came back, I was like, oh yeah, what happened? I was glad that because so much was happening. I'd kind of forgotten about her dad at that point. And I thought that was,
and he was around when they were young, and he was able to provide that little bit of, knowledge about the fairy tale that she was looking for. So yeah, I felt like it was kind of a nice full circle thing, I guess, to bring him back at the end.
Yeah, I don't know if Geraldine if she couldn't remember, didn't want to remember, wasn't allowing herself to feel, but she never would say what the powers were. What was the blocker for her on that?
Honestly, I think it's kind of a combination of what you're saying. I think it's something that she didn't like to think about. And it's almost, in a way, I kind of think of it as something she didn't want to give herself. Geraldine sort of pushes away all of those, the way she was before she was kind of forced to grow up so quickly. And, the picture, if you remember, that Tara finds when she used to dance, and, she sort of shuts all that away and doesn't really want to go there or think about it, doesn't give that to herself ever. So I think it was the same way with the fairy tale. And then there's always that part of Geraldine that's very practical and why would we waste time on fairy tales? And, so that was part of it too. But
Yeah, no frivolity.
yeah,
So much, it's not, I also agree, like it's not black and white, but also so much as second chances, like what you're talking about. For her, what do you think? For like, I'm making you go into the future with this novel. So,
yeah,
we know that Mr. Bertucci, is that how you say his name?
yeah, yeah.
That he, goes along to the police station and explains and drops charges, and that she's going to meet at the office, but that's as far as you take it. So what do you think? Do you think she still works there, or do you think she has to start anew?
Again, and I'm all about like the second chances and forgiveness and understanding. And I think that I like to think that she was able to continue working there. Certainly not in the management role.
Right.
But she was good at when she was just doing those numbers, and she had her little corner in that office. And so I like to think that Mr. Bertucci probably gave her a chance to just settle back into that, what she was really good at. And so yeah, that's my guess. But she'll have a different, there'll be a different manager running the office for sure.
Yeah, to be a fly on the wall. Is the other character Rose or Rosie? Like, if she were her manager, oh, I can only imagine how
I
that
know that's a
goes.
tough one because I don't know if she would have been willing to keep Geraldine on. So I don't know. There might be some. You never know. Maybe they'll end up working it out. That I'm not sure about. But
Um, what about Andrea? She's an interesting character, Connor's mom. Um,
yeah,
what do you think about her, and do you think she has the second chance? Because she does end up giving up the information that's going to be, the thing that takes out O'Shea.
yeah. I like to think that that's a first step for her. She's a really long way to go. We all know how incredibly difficult it is to overcome an addiction, and it's been a long time for her. But I think the hope is how much she loves her son and clearly would like to be part of his life. So I like to think that her willingness to even take that step and try to help the police is, I mean, in a way, she's got to realize that this is going to mean changing her life drastically. So I love to think that that's a good chance for her. Again, I don't see her, becoming mother of the year and everyone's going to move in and be happily ever after. But I do certainly have hope that she kind of finds a different path and connects with Connor to some degree.
Brian didn't really bulldoze her into that confession either. I mean, he really just tapped on heartstrings as for her as a mother and with the family to get her there, which makes it seem like more of a possibility that
Right.
she could be a good mother versus if it were just, threatened, like Hank probably would have done it. I don't know that I
Right.
would have believed that there could be that turnaround.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's when I remember writing that scene and thinking about what approach would he take with her. And just, I think his connection with the family and appealing to that in her. And I met your son and he's a great kid. So yeah, I think you're right. It's much more effective than threatening. And she has ownership in it then in her decision. So
Well, I definitely don't see them all around the Thanksgiving table. But I do possibly, maybe baseball's the connector, and
right.
does get the chance
Right.
to be in the stands, and maybe the granddad gets the chance to be in the stands, because Connor is such a loving and forgiving child.
Yes.
So that's
Yeah.
kind of where I pictured the
I think that's doable. I think that's doable.
um all right. Can you talk a little bit about Geraldine's hoarding? Because that was an
Mm.
interesting take. I'm assuming that you have seen that in your career prior to being a writer. Has that been addressed, or is that where you got the material?
Yeah, I did see quite a bit of that. I did spend time in homes where people were engaging in that behavior. And it is, and I also always do some research as well, because I haven't worked. I've been out of the mental health field for a while now. So I always like to make sure I'm keeping up. But I landed on that pretty early for Geraldine because of her her OCD tendencies, and it felt like that's where she would go. And I also think that hoarding, to some degree, is largely misunderstood by some people. I mean, it can be tough to understand if you don't kind of read up or dig into it, why people do that. It certainly has nothing to do with, laziness or being cheap. It goes much deeper than that for most people. So yeah, it's in my mind, and she was a hard character to write, Geraldine, because I know she got on everybody's nerves, for sure. She's hard to like sometimes. I think my biggest hope was just that there would be understanding of why she is kind of a really difficult person at times, and why she's the way she is. But yeah, that behavior felt very natural for Geraldine, given the stresses and her anxiety, and her just perfectionism and great fear of making any mistakes, and certainly not wanting anyone to know she's made any mistakes. And so yeah, that did also come from some experience as well as some research.
Well, she seemed to use it as a coping mechanism, but it really backfires and makes her more anxious because of the lack of turnover. That she has so great intentions with these things that she thinks she can sell, but then it just is this vicious circle of stress.
Yeah, and it creates more stress because she doesn't, and this holds true for a lot of people dealing with that. They're ashamed of it. They don't want people to know. They try to hide it, or all of those really tough emotions. So yeah, you're right. It just in the end creates more anxiety from her. Just like at work, when she's hiding mistakes and she won't hand off work because she is afraid of losing control. And I mean, she really is her own worst enemy, for sure.
Well, I think I see a question in the box here. I'm going to go ahead and ask that.
Okay.
While we're getting to it, Shannon wants to know about the cover of this book. She says, I love it. Just wondering what inspired the cover of the Connellys of County Down.
I wish I could take any credit because I think it's beautiful. But my publisher, the design team there, I got an email one day and they were like, all right, what do you think? And I was like, oh my God, that's beautiful. And the more I sat with it, the more perfect it felt, because to me, it very much represents, it's representative of the whole book, but particularly the fairy tales, because, fairy tales can be scary and they usually have sort of a dark thread in them. And so that's what the cover makes me think of, and why it felt like such a great fit. But yeah, I wish I could take any credit for that one. That was all them.
And what about, now I did not listen to the audiobook of this, but I know several of the people here did. Can you talk about the narrator and the process choosing, who narrated this book?
Well, Barry Krynick narrated this book, as well as my first book, Brennans, which my publisher sent a couple kind of, I guess we call them auditions, or just Barry as well. So a couple other people read portions. And as soon as I heard Barry, I thought, oh my gosh, she is great. And particularly with my first book, there was a lot of Northern Irish accent in there. And I really wanted someone who's going to get it right. And she did 100%. She's fantastic. She's done lots of other books people may have listened to, and lots of other accents. She's amazing. So when they came back and said, hey, how about Barry for this one? I was totally on board. I was like, absolutely 100%. So.
Well, she's not the only crossover that I saw. You do mention Brennans in this book. Obviously that was intentional.
Yeah.
Tell us about that decision.
There's another one that I get asked about all the time, and I'm never going to live this down, but I have to credit my husband with that one. He was reading a draft, and I had Tara and Brian going to dinner, and this book takes place not far from where Brennans was supposed to have taken place. And he said, well, why don't you just have him go to Brennans? And in my mind, I thought, well, they're in Westchester. They're not going to drive 20, 30 minutes to dinner. There's too, and he's like, nobody knows that. Just put it there. So I thought about it and I thought, okay, that would be fun. So I put it in, and sure enough, people have really responded to that. And it was just, it's a fun little tidbit. But I actually carry that through in my next book, because I think there's something, and it doesn't take place in Westchester, the next one, but I like that. It's fun and it's a little connection, but it's also just sort of that idea that the world is actually kind of a small place sometimes. So anyway, yeah, got to give that one to my husband. So
Well, tell him thank you. Tell him
yeah, it was a great idea.
We love that he dropped that Easter egg for us. But for me, when you said you didn't know that they would drive 20, 30 minutes, I thought, oh, for sure they would drive, because they're trying to keep it secret to a certain extent and not let the whole community know that the felon is dating the cop.
No, you're 100% correct. So it was probably that first draft, and like DaCosta wasn't in there yet, and so I was still figuring so much out. But yeah, we do that. We like, well, logically they wouldn't drive, but anyway, in the end, it was a great idea, and I loved adding it.
Well, it was perfect. Someone asked, Carol, talking about Connor's jokes. They were like, I think it was great comedic relief in this book. Where did you find them?
That's a combination. So I knew a teacher who gave me a couple. She's an elementary school teacher. And then I actually think I found one online. I just kind of put feelers out. I might have even gotten one or two from my boys when they were younger. But early on, when I knew that was going to be kind of a special thing between him and Tara, I just sort of jotted down several and kind of pick them, use them as I could. But that came from a combination of places. So,
well, for me, one of the best spots, one of the kind of heartbreaking spots, is when Tara goes to the school to ask for the joke, because you watch, this is so final. But then there's hope when they're in the car and Geraldine uses that. And I think, oh, there is hope for Geraldine, right? Because like you said, it's hard to like her.
yes.
But in that moment, it was so redeeming that when she let a lot of that go, that guilt, that blame, she really became more of a mother figure to him, or an aunt, more of an aunt than just, a landlord.
Yeah. I hope people did see that at the end with Geraldine, that as she was able to let go of some of these fears, that just the more human side of her came out. So yeah, I loved giving her that opportunity because it was really a selfless thing. She didn't want Connor to worry about Tara in that moment, and so she asked for the joke, and that was kind of a special moment for them. So yeah, I think there's hope for Geraldine.
I have some rapid fire questions for you, though. Don't
okay.
Much. Everybody's eyebrows go up when I say this. I think it's kind of a panic moment, but it shouldn't be too bad. All right, here we go. New Jersey or New York?
New York.
City or suburb?
If it's between those two, I'd say city. I'm a small town person. So
East Coast or West Coast?
West Coast.
Buying used or new?
Ooh, it depends. For books, new.
Eat in or eat out?
Eat out, especially since our boys are gone off to college in the Army. So that's, yeah.
Online or offline?
That's tough. I'd say offline. That's certainly when I get my best work done. Yeah.
Vegetarian or carnivore?
Mostly veggie, but not strictly.
Casserole or no thank you?
On a cold day, absolutely. There are some days where nothing hits the spot like a good casserole.
And can you give us one more Connor joke? Do you have an extra you didn't use?
Oh my gosh, I wish I had them in front of me. I probably had a few I just couldn't squeeze in. I'm sorry. I don't have
No
one off
worries.
the
No
top of
worries.
my head.
If someone has a great one in the audience here, put it in the chat box and I'll read it live, or you can actually go on live and do it yourself if you'd like to. Great job though. Thought those were fun. Does anybody have a question that they want to ask? If so, go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll go ahead and get to those now. All right, I'm going to go ahead and go with my questions. Trust. When do you think Tara really started to trust again? Because that was a big issue for her all along. I think she always trusted Eddie for the most part, but other than that, it seems like she really didn't even trust herself sometimes. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, when you sort of grow up the way she did, the way they did, trust is really hard to come by. So that, to me, that's going to be just kind of an ongoing thing way beyond the book for Tara. But when she I guess it's that, not so much just her dad that does it, but that seeing the consequence of where having no trust could end her up, certainly I think weighed in there. And then as far as trust in herself, he gave her that when he talked about the fairy tale and was able to kind of provide this, answer these questions, burning questions she had, because she didn't kind of trust herself, but she wanted so much to know, right, what her special power was, and he was able to give that to her. And I think that was probably big moments of building some trust for her, enough to come back and just and face whatever was waiting for her. But yeah, I think that was going to be a kind of a lifelong ongoing thing for her.
Well, so much of it too, she took on herself and she didn't trust her siblings to do much of anything,
Right.
and so I think when he tells the story, he really builds up their 2/3 to her 1/3 so that she can trust them to do the right thing or to help her when she's in need. So I think that too, from the fairy tale, was a really important turning point for her, because he emphasized it took all three of you to save each other, not just one, but all three.
Yes, 100%. And Eddie has his moment too, when they're both with Judy, the therapist, and he says, I don't think you do. Obviously, he feels so guilty, and so he owes her so much in his mind. But at the same time, he sort of realized that the fact that she wants to take everything over and do it herself doesn't necessarily help him or Geraldine. So yeah, I mean, they're a tight crew, these three, but obviously so much of it came from the early childhood trauma, so it's become sort of a little bit of a unhealthy dynamic, obviously, and they all have to learn that in their own ways. But yeah, the fairy tale was huge in realizing how that it wasn't just her, that she did have her special power too, but it only worked when the three of them worked together.
So when we're talking about the three siblings, I mean, there's definitely roles and differences in responsibility for them. And depending on their order, you see different traits come out. Was that intentional with your three and building up who they were?
I think so. And I mean, some of it's sort of natural. I mean, often the oldest child will take on a little bit more responsibility. And I know that changes, and it's not always the case. It's a generalization, but particularly in this case where she was the caretaker from a very young age and watching over these two kids. It just, the direction Geraldine went in seemed just sort of paved for her from then. And then you've had Tara, who's sort of questioned everything and didn't want to listen to Geraldine, and then you get Eddie in the middle as the peacemaker, and I think you see that a lot, to some degree in a lot of families, and depending what people have been through, but they definitely all played their roles for sure.
Are you a sibling?
I am. I'm an older sibling. I have one younger brother.
Okay.
So yeah, I could relate in some ways, although in some ways I was kind of a much more of a pain in the ass than he was when we were growing up, to be honest. So, and that was one thing I think that I kind of felt connected to Tara about, was the idea that sometimes the person who might look the worst from the outside, or got in the most trouble, or appeared to be struggling the most, that often they're just a reflection of what's going on with the rest of the family as well. Sometimes you have act outers and you have act inners, and so sometimes the person who might look the worst on paper isn't, that may not necessarily be the case.
Well, and that sort of brought Hank to his conclusion on Tara, right? Because all that added up to her guilt, no matter, and there was no digging deeper because of those assumptions.
Yeah. I mean, she doesn't. It doesn't look good. Her record doesn't look good, and certainly her recent charge and getting out of prison. So she had a lot going against her, for sure. But there's, as with most of us, there's more to the story. So yeah, but Hank was pretty comfortable, I think, putting her in the little box.
Definitely. All right, I really want to go into detail about the fairy tale, because I did find that fascinating. Is that something that you created, or is that something that you heard about, like from an Irish folk tale or fairy tale? And tell us about how it got on the page.
Pretty early on, I brought the fairy tales in, and they grew kind of a bigger role with each revision. But I like the idea. They all, miss their mom so much and kind of had a bond with her. And I like the idea that there was this positive, remnants, this fairy tale, or these fairy tales that she used to tell them, that they still all sort of hang on to some degree. We all have that stuff, I think, from our childhood that, comes up here and there, and it's special. And so this was a nice bond between them and their mom. And it was a nice way to work in kind of a little bit of Irish flavor. I have heard a lot of those fairy tales growing up. I've got a lot of Irish relatives. There's a lot of storytellers in our family. And then of course I wanted her to just, in the end, create one that was just for them, which that was of course the one that she was on such a mission to find out about. But yeah, that came from some family stuff. And, but again, I had to do my research, and I read up on some fairy tales, particularly Finn McCool. I'd heard of him, but there's so many of them out there. So that was kind of another fun thread to work in, the fairy tales.
Well, it also gave Tara an interesting start to the story, right? Because she used those fairy tales to help out her cellmate to get through the time. And it made us realize from the beginning, oh, she has a good heart, right? Like it sets the stage for, this is Tara's core, even though we're not quite sure why she's in prison or if she should be
right
there, but it really sets the tone for her main attribute.
Yeah, and she brings that forward in her work, even with the gamers. That idea of, I think she's drawn to that, and giving people special powers, and helping them see the hero within themselves. So yeah, again, there's just a nice connection to mom and each other, in a way to carry it through in her art.
Well, have you ever considered making this into a children's book fairy tale, like an illustrated book of stories and powers? And I don't know, I just think that'd be interesting.
No, I appreciate that. They were fun to think about, and I certainly could see them. I mean, that's something I'd pick up for my own kids when they were young. I haven't thought about that. I can't draw, so I'd have to. I can write it probably, but I'd have to get
Tara, she'll be good.
Yeah.
Which powers, if you were going to tell this story to your boys, what powers would you give them?
Oh my gosh. Probably the oldest, he's just wicked smart. Sometimes I don't know where he got it, but he's like memory, like a steel trap, and can talk about anything. So it's something to do with that, I'm sure, like figuring out how to navigate the fairy forest, maybe. And our youngest, he's also very smart, but he's got a super big heart. And he's a little bit of a peacemaker. He's got maybe a touch of Eddie in that sense. So his power would definitely have something to do with that, I think.
Eddie's really the only one we haven't really talked about today. And I love that you brought that up with your son having that special heart, because that's really that's the crux that switches Geraldine, right? That it's his heart that gets him to get her in there. So can you talk a little bit about Eddie for us?
Yeah. I knew that I wanted Tara to have a big brother, and early on I felt like he would sort of be her biggest connection, I guess. And but given what she does for him, he certainly needed to have his own struggles, and they all did. But I grew to, he was one of my favorite characters really that I've written. Eddie just has such a good heart. And his trouble seeing what he can do, which is, nice that he's got this Lorraine who sees it in him. Like she obviously thinks he can do it and is a big cheerleader for him. But yeah, I wanted a really special connection between him and Tara. But again, it's kind of morphed into something that isn't quite healthy at times. But that's her biggest fear, has always been losing him. So I knew they would have kind of a special bond from the beginning, really.
I loved their connection. I thought it was very sweet and very believable too. And the appreciation with Connor there, I think it really when Tara comes back, lets Eddie relax a little bit, because he knows
Yeah.
Tara is so good with Connor.
And I think that her return helps him just begin to sort of step up a little bit, even early on when it looks like Tara might be headed back to prison. In that first meeting with DaCosta, it's actually Eddie that comes to her rescue, and makes the case for her. And so, yeah, I think her return helps trigger some growth for Eddie too.
Well, Jill wants to know how you write family so well. She's just wondering about yours. We know you have one sibling, but do you have a very large family that you pull? I heard you say we have storytellers. Like, how do you pull all this together?
Yeah, and growing up, it was just me and my brother and parents who eventually they divorced when I was in middle school. But I did have a large extended family in New York and in Ireland. My dad was from Northern Ireland, from County Down, and he was one of 15. So we spent a lot of time there. I spent a lot of summers there growing up, and I still go back. I was there a couple of years ago. So and then my mom was one of 4, and they all had kids, and they were all around New York. So although it was, we were kind of a smallish, I guess, unit, we were around family a lot, loads of cousins and aunts and uncles. And so that's where a lot of storytellers come in. And certainly I observed so many dynamics, within that, but then also working in the mental health field for a long time. With families from just all over the place and in all kinds of situations. I've had a lot of opportunities to just kind of study human nature and family relationships and all of that. So,
well, we love your study of relationships and human nature. So please keep it coming. I would say I
thank you.
attended the Peloton Moms Reading Group author chat for your first book, for We Are the Brennans. And I know that you acknowledged at the end of the book that readers are one of the reasons you wanted to write another book. And so I really want to encourage you. I know you mentioned that you're writing, and I just want to encourage you to keep writing and to find out that little spoiler maybe of what you're writing about. Or can you give us anything?
Yeah. So the third one will be out next fall. And it's except for sort of finishing touches, it's actually about done. And what I would tell you, it's the next one sort of takes a really intimate look at both sides of a marriage that has fallen apart. but it's also very much about the power of community. It happens in a small town, and with the kind of close-knit family and neighbors, and so it is a lot about the power of community as well, and it's a little bit about the magic of middle school hockey. It's kind of a fun storyline in there. So yeah, so that'll be out in roughly a year, a little less, hopefully. So we're finding a date now.
Are y'all still working on a title for that book?
No, actually, the title is done. It is What Happened to the McCraes. So
Okay, thank you.
yeah,
Looking forward to that. We'll be adding that to our TBR.
thank
And
you.
then another question that we always ask are, what are some books that you have read or you're planning to read that you would recommend to us?
Yeah, I've got a few. Well, first, and probably many people have read this, but one I read this year that definitely is going to be one of my favorites of all time is Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. Amazing. But everybody knows that. So yeah, I absolutely love it. For anyone that has any interest in learning any more, reading any more about the Troubles in Northern Ireland that I just sort of lightly touch on in this book, one fantastic book I read this year was Trespasses by Louise Kennedy. Fantastic book about the Troubles. Another one that I think I sort of came across on Instagram is Unlikely Animals by, I believe, Annie Hartnett. And it was fantastic. I see someone nodding. It was such a great book. Again, about a family, go figure. But really kind of refreshing and different. Absolutely loved it. And then one I would mention to you guys, especially if you like family drama, it's not, I got to read a little bit early. It's out in January, but Mercury by Amy Jo Burns. Fantastic family book. So yeah, there's a few to get you going.
Well, Shanna says Unlikely Animals is on her list for the year, but she hasn't gotten to it. And I will plug for it as well. That was one of my earlier author chats with Annie Hartnett. So
I'll have to go back and watch that. Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, incentive for everybody to watch it and go back. It's interesting because there's a twist on Our Town, I think, with that book that is just fascinating. And she does it's just such an interesting look too. It's a different perspective that you normally don't get. I think that's why people are drawn to it.
It really was different. Yeah, I really liked it though. Very yeah, I thought it was fantastic. And the last one I'll mention to you guys, I actually just started this afternoon, was Bright Young Woman by Jessica Knoll. A little different, a little dark. I'm only a few pages in, but I'm hooked. So looks like somebody else knows that one too.
Yeah, I think Rachel was saying, yeah, like she's definitely voting for that when she just read it as well.
Yeah, it looks really good so far. So I'm into it.
Fantastic cover as well. So
yeah,
well, looks like we have plenty to read coming up.
Yeah, I know there's so many.
and you mentioned finding books on Instagram. That's all of us. So it's it's very easy to add to our list. So thank you, though. We appreciate these recommendations. Thank you, Tracey, so much for coming. Thank you, readers out there, for joining. Please make sure you check out her website, where you're going to find book club kits on both of her books, as well as her active Instagram. She's always on, and drop her a note sometime. But I also would like everybody to follow the LBs on Instagram and Facebook, and especially on YouTube. And you can find out reviews, recommendations, and more about these author chats. And 2 Sundays, I'll be chatting with Kathleen Grissom for her historical novel, Crow Mary, in honor of Native American Heritage Month. This novel is inspired by the real life of the real Crow Mary and endorsed by her great-granddaughter, Crow elders, and Crow scholars. This is an epic love story that sweeps across decades, showcases the beauty of the natural world, and probes the intimacies of marriage and one woman's heart. If that doesn't capture you, I don't know what will. Sadiqa Johnson, who is the author of Reese's book club pick, The House of Eve, which I also recommend, says Kathleen Grissom has the gift of waking up the past with fever, illuminating an aspect of American history that few know. Each page engulfed me in a world of conflict, love, and heartache. Tender, compelling, and profoundly educational and satisfying read. The strength and sheer bravery of Crow Mary will stay with me for a long time. I hope you get a chance to read it over the next 2 weeks. I think you'll get through it. And it's the perfect time of year to think about these situations that Native Americans have been through. If you know of an author that you would like to hear from, please contact me, let me know. And I'm just so excited to be here with you for all these author chats and enjoy these so much. And so I hope you'll join me again coming up. Tracey, you're awesome. We love you. Can't wait for fall. I can't get here soon enough.
Thank you guys so much for reading and for your questions. This is wonderful. Thank you.
Thank y'all so much. See y'all next time.
Bye.